I've negotiated thousands of SAP contracts during my career. What are the key commercial concessions you should ask for from SAP, and what is SAP likely to concede on? That's what I want to talk about today. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney. For the last 20 years, I've devoted my practice to drafting and negotiating software-related agreements and litigating ERP failures in courts across the country. SAP contracts contain audit provisions, which are, at first look, relatively simple, and they don't look particularly onerous, but there is, the devil is in the details with the simplicity. And I think when you're dealing with an SAP audit provision in particular, you have to understand that the vagueness associated with their right to audit you really is going to result in a regular audit process that can happen multiple times a year that is going to be onerous and resource heavy. You want to clearly identify when and how often that SAP audit is going to take place. In other words, is it going to be a audit that is done remotely through the system? Is it going to be an audit that is done on your site via third-party auditors? If that is the case, who are they? Are they going to maintain, whatever confidentiality obligation SAP has as they're looking through your system? Are they going to abide by whatever workforce or workplace procedures that you have regarding workplace safety, access, those types of things? You need to think about that. I also think it's incredibly important for you to limit the frequency of these audits. What you don't want is a salesperson going through a customer list, identifying you and thinking that you're out of compliance, and he's performing an audit once a quarter. You want to reduce that audit frequency to, I would say, once every 12 months, once a year, or something along those lines. You want to have an understanding of who is going to pay for the audit. Is that something that you're going to pay for? Is SAP going to pay for the auditors coming on site? And then you want to have some clarity around what happens if you're out of compliance. So if it's a non-material compliance, is it going to be easily remedied? If it's a substantive compliance, what happens then? Ideally, we would want to see contract language that would allow you to remedy that non-compliance by purchasing additional users, licenses, whatever metric is governing the contract. You purchase additional licenses at whatever negotiated rates you've been able to put into that agreement. Maybe be able to take advantage of a future option. You don't want to have to pay list price. If you're 10 users out of compliance, you don't want to pay whatever the new list price is. You want to be able to pay the negotiated price. And I think that's something that you should ask for. I think that aspect of it might be a little bit difficult for SAP to agree to. They would argue, I would assume, that that might promote or encourage you to be out of compliance, because then you're going to get the advantage of your negotiated rate. But certainly these are the things you want to focus on with respect to an audit provision. You have to think about capping the SAP's ability to increase prices with respect to a renewal. And so, I think that is going to depend on how long your term is. If you've got a 3-year term, a 5-year term, a 7-year term, whatever it is, I think the longer the term, I think you probably have a little bit more leverage with respect to capping prices on an ongoing basis. And the way that you would do this, or what you want to be thinking about as you go through this capping prices concept here, is are you going to cap prices on a yearly basis for each year of the term? Is the term going to be fixed? The prices for the term, is that going to be fixed? And then only on the renewal of a new term, is that then going to be subject to some sort of a price cap? What's reasonable? I think if you can get a 2%, maybe a 3% cap, alternatively, if you can tie it to CPI, maybe plus a little bit percentage over that, those are the types of percentages I think would typically be well received. SAP's got kind of a lockstep methodology by which they will raise their prices, but I think if you can keep them down to 1%, 2%, even 3%, I think you're doing a pretty good job. One of the other concessions that we would typically ask for and see in these types of agreements is really a right to, I think, swap out functionality or software and modules, exchange it out. So the concept here is you want to avoid having shelfware that you are not using but you are paying for, and whether that's on a traditional on-prem model or a SaaS model, it doesn't really make much of a difference. You don't want to be having an access right or license to software that's not being utilized, and ideally what you want to be able to do is have some sort of a provision in the contract that says that if you're not using a particular piece of functionality, you can either terminate your access or license to it, or you can swap it out for other software of equal price, or maybe you pay a little bit more for that swap. One of the other concessions is really the order of precedence. You want to be thinking about how these contracts really interact with each other. You've got a general terms and conditions. You're going to have individual order forms, and the way that they're typically set up is that the order form that you're executing today is going to take precedence over hard-fought negotiated language in the general terms and conditions, and that might be okay as a one-off for particular functionality, but if you spent thousands of dollars in attorney time and a lot of resources negotiating robust limitations liability, expanded warranty provisions, whatever it is, you want to make sure that those are not negated because you've now signed a new contract order. You want to think about what I would call SKU continuity, and SAP is notorious for randomly changing the SKU of whatever functionality or module that you're licensing. So you're licensing some sort of CRM module or functionality, and it's got a certain SKU number as of the date that you access it or sign the contract, and then it changes, and now you've got to relicense it or pay more money to access it. You want to make sure that there's some level of continuity between what you're using and that you're not paying more. You want to make sure that you put language in the contract that prevents SAP from degrading the functionality that you have licensed. And so what we mean by this is these contracts are going to include language that's favorable to SAP, which is going to allow them to be able to modify the functionality, modify the terms and conditions that is applicable to certain pieces of functionality. And I think that's generally a reasonable ask on SAP's part. It's something that they want. They want to be able to increase what they're offering to you, provide you with additional bells and whistles. But at the same time, if there are going to be changes to the terms, or there are going to be changes to user manuals or to the software itself, you want to make sure that that change does not degrade the functionality that you have paid money for. You want to make sure that it's always going to be at least equivalent to what you have licensed, or it is going to improve upon the software that you thought you were buying. In these videos, we talk a lot about termination assistance, and that is one of the concessions that you need to make sure that you get from SAP. And it can take a variety of forms, but essentially what you want to have in the contract is language that allows you a certain period of time to access or utilize that software in order to get off of it. And so, whether that's an extended termination period or it really is a termination and then SAP providing you with some sort of termination assistance, it doesn't really matter. The goal is, you need to transition from SAP to a new vendor. It's going to be difficult to do. You need to extract your data. You need to be able to make sure that that data is in good shape and that you can convert that into the new functionality that you're licensing from a different vendor. Incredibly important to include that in your contract, and something that SAP should generally agree to. SLA availability. What I mean by that is, service level agreements. There's typically, an addendum or a schedule to the general terms and conditions that obligates SAP to make available the software for a certain guaranteed uptime. And what you want to make sure is that you get the most uptime that you can. I believe SAP's standard uptime is something like 99.7, which sounds good, but for the duration of a month-long period, there's a significant amount of downtime that you could be experiencing. So you want to get that number up. You also want to make sure that you have some sort of real remedy if the uptime guarantee is not followed through on. And typically what we would see is some sort of a credit, some sort of a refund. And then what we like to put in these agreements is some sort of ability on your part to be able to terminate that contract if the downtime is excessive. So if the uptime guarantee, for example, is not met more than 3 times in a quarter, then not only do you get credit, maybe you get a refund, and you've got the ability to terminate the agreement. The final thing that I think you really need to ask for when you're negotiating with SAP is you need to address this concept of indirect access. This was a big deal some years ago, but what SAP makes clear is that if you have other pieces of technology, other software, other functionality that's interfacing with and pulling data from the SAP software, that is going to count against your license metric, and you're going to have to pay for it. So maybe you've got 150 physical users of the software that are counting against the license metric, but you also have 50 pieces of technology or technology platforms that are interfacing and pulling data and interacting with the SAP software. You've got to account for that situation. You want to be able to do that without incurring some sort of massive overage for a fee that's reasonable. So that's something that you definitely need to address with SAP. So I think if you can leverage some of these concessions, get some of these incorporated into your contract, I think you're setting yourself up for success. If you have any questions about any of the issues in this video, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to help you and love to set you on the right track. You can reach us at mharris@taflaw.com. Look me up on LinkedIn or YouTube. Love to hear from you and love to help you out. What are the concede? What are the concede?